Hello there, and welcome to South Shore Arts Art in Focus. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Summer Sharinghausen. I am the Director of Education, and I will be hosting our conversation this evening with Jamie Schumacher, who is a good friend of mine. Before we do begin, I have a few announcements that I wanted to make. First, to thank our sponsor, Community Healthcare Systems, for supporting this program so that it's free for all of you to participate. And let you know also that at South Shore Arts, we have summer art classes, workshops, and camps coming up, and registration will be live on our website starting Monday, May 10th. Our website is www.southshoreartsonline.org, and you can check out the class listings and registration links there. Our current exhibitions in the main gallery, we have the Tri-County Junior High and Senior High exhibition of youth created artwork, and I've seen it. It's impressive. Check it out if you can. It's available online at our website or in the gallery space itself. And tomorrow, there will be a virtual live presentation of the awards ceremony. So that's Friday, May 7th at 5:30 p.m. And in our other gallery spaces in the atrium, we have James Bowden. In Cafe Fresco, Melissa Griffin. And in the meeting room at the Center for Visual and Performing Arts, we have Barbara Meeker. Our next Art in Focus will be the final Art in Focus presentation of this season. And it will be on Thursday, May 20th with Carrie Ann Quick. She will be discussing with us her project called A Portrait of People in Motion. So if you are joining us this evening on Zoom, you will be able to ask questions and make comments throughout the presentation and interact with our presenter, Jamie Schumacher. You can do that by typing your questions and comments in the Q&A section or in the chat box, and I will be monitoring that while Jamie is presenting. We will be stopping periodically to answer questions throughout the presentation instead of waiting until the very end. So feel free to ask them as you have them. So our guest, like I said, this evening is Jamie Schumacher, and I will ask Jamie to go ahead and join us. Hi, Jamie.
Hello.
So this season for Art in Focus, we tried to choose presenters that really respect and honor diversity, and Jamie is no exception to that rule. Jamie works in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and she has done a lot of work with a lot of different cultures in her community. And I actually got to know Jamie through one of her many, many projects, which was a gallery she founded in Northeast Minneapolis called Altered Aesthetics. And actually the artwork behind me here was purchased at Altered Aesthetics, where I met Jamie. I'll let her talk more about that, but I also want to just give her a little shout out with, I got her book here that she wrote a few years ago, and soon to be arriving in my mailbox will be her second book. So Jamie is an author. She has worked in a lot of different arts communities in the Twin Cities, which she'll talk about, and she's coming to us right now from Twin Cities, Minnesota. So I'll hand it over to you, Jamie.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. That was so sweet. Thanks, everybody. Should I start sharing my screen now? Just have that background, or okay. Sure. Okay, well, thanks for that warm welcome. So thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I know that we can be zoomed out these days, so I really appreciate you sharing your evening with me and inviting me here. A heads up that I do have a little bit of like an allergy attack right now. They seem especially terrible this year. So there might be points where I duck off screen and use a Kleenex and then come back. But yeah, we can get started. I'd love to know what you all are, if you guys have snacks or if you're drinking anything. I'm having some lemon tea with honey in it. So feel free to like use the chat, and this doesn't have to be super formal, but I don't mind questions throughout, or if there's something that's not clear, feel free to stop me because there's a lot of stuff in here. So with that, we can maybe get rolling. So thanks for joining tonight. I've got this broken up. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk a little bit about the community projects that I worked on. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of art and culture in communities and the benefits that it can play. And then I'll wrap it up with just some ideas for what you can do if you're not already bringing art and culture into your communities, some ideas for things that you can do. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some more radical ideas at the very end. So I like to do things in consistent numbers, and 13 is my lucky number. My birthday is July 13th, so these are all in sets of 13. So some things you should know about me: I'm the daughter of immigrants. So this is my mom, my dad. They're friggin' adorable, and I love them. But these are happy pictures of them before they had kids. So when they got to like go out and party and drink. But these are my parents. My sister and I are 2 kids with a ton of cousins in a mostly immigrant family. My dad is from Sri Lanka and my mother is from Poland. I grew up in Southern California in the 80s, which was super radical, tripendicular in all the ways that growing up in California in the 80s could be. You could check my awesome Pac-Man sweater, but that definitely shaped a lot of me growing up during that time in that place. I moved to Minnesota in 2003. I started out in St. Paul. I lived in Twin Cities for a little while as well. And shortly after moving, I opened an art gallery, as Summer mentioned. So Altered Aesthetics was a community space. And I opened that when I was in my early 20s and just really wanted to create a place where people could make art for art's sake. And it wasn't about a big fancy gallery with big fancy artists. It was more about community art and art that, was about what the art was trying to say, as opposed to how many people the artist had on their mailing list. Getting really involved with Altered Aesthetics and really kind of falling in love with the nonprofit community of Minnesota. I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to learn more about how arts organizations could do their work more effectively. And most of the research out there, a lot of it was about traditional models, traditional hierarchies, and I wanted to see how we could do things differently. So I finished my master's at the University of Minnesota, thinking about how small nonprofits could be a little bit more innovative, kind of flatten out those hierarchies and share power within organizations. So finished my master's at the University of Minnesota. And throughout that time, Altered Aesthetics was located in the Northeast Minneapolis Arts District. And I worked with the Northeast Arts District as well as other cultural and creative districts throughout the Twin Cities. That's either planning location-based strategies, things to help emerging artists, working with places like the Creative Enterprise Zone, which is an emerging creative district in the Twin Cities. And that's just kind of where I've found myself really inspired, is working in places where there's that intersection of art and culture and economic development and community development. So as Summer mentioned, I am an artist. I started out doing makeup artistry and making monsters, which is the best job ever. I worked for Knott's Berry Farm and Halloween Hunt, and I got to make masks and make monsters, but I also do paint and I sculpt as well. For me, connecting to my culture has been critically important to me. So as I mentioned, my mother's from Poland, my dad is from Sri Lanka. The picture at the bottom is just me and my cousins in Sri Lanka. But reconnecting with those parts of my family and those sides of our history, I do a lot of research while I'm painting. I do a lot of learning, and connecting to those parts of my roots has been a big part of me feeling like becoming whole. I'm also a mom. I've got 2 awesome little girls, which in a little while you might hear them in the background being very loud, but for now they're outside playing. But I've got my daughter Maddie, that's my husband Nick, and my youngest daughter Zarina. We live by the woods, so we're in Bloomington, Minnesota. I'm actually looking out on the woods right now with a dog. That's our dog Rufus. He is eating all of our furniture and our couch and my shoes. He's a new addition to the family. And then our pandemic pandemic thing was chickens. So we got a repurposed coop last year and added 4 chickens to the family, and they're really awesome and fun. And chickens have way more personality than I realized chickens could have. I currently work with Twin Cities LISC and the Twin Cities Cultural Districts. So there's about 24 or more emerging and established districts in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I work with those organizations in those districts to help them build capacity, do things like wayfinding, signage, artist support, small business support. We did a lot of COVID relief last year with the pandemic, and last year with the uprising, a lot of small business support. So that's my job, and it's really wonderful. I get to focus in on the creative and cultural aspects of our cities. So as Summer mentioned, thank you. I am the author of 2 books, and I write regularly for a variety of publications. My first book talks about the Altered Aesthetics Gallery and the experience of starting a nonprofit in the Northeast community. And my second book is Butterflies and Tall Bikes, and it's about the West Bank, Cedar Riverside neighborhood, and that cultural district. And with that book, I interview 25 different community members, businesses, folks that lived in the neighborhood in the past, folks that live in the neighborhood now. And with COVID, I know we're traveling a little bit less, but if you want to take a trip in a book, I encourage you to check this out, because that's what I've heard back from readers, is that it feels like I was there, and which is definitely needed now since we don't get to get out as much as we'd like. I also serve on the City of Bloomington's Creative Placemaking Commission. The City of Bloomington, which is where I live, is a suburb of the Twin Cities, and it's the only city in the States that has a Creative Placemaking Commission. The city decided a while ago that they really wanted to be super specific and focus and dedicate funding to creative placemaking in the city. So I'm really lucky to serve on an appointed position to this commission. And it's great. I've been doing this work in the Twin Cities, did it in Minneapolis when I lived there, moved to Bloomington about 2 years ago, and really enjoy being able to do this now where I live and I'm raising my kids. I'm going to pause there for a moment.
Thank you, Jamie. I have a question.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about your transition from California to Minnesota?
Which part?
Any part, just what
Any
it was
part?
like to move to the Twin Cities. It's a very different culture, a very different climate.
Yeah, so like I said, I moved in 2003. I just wanted I think you learn so much more when you travel and live in new places, and I hadn't had that really. We lived in the same place growing up, and I really wanted to try living someplace new. I came out to visit friends for New Year's one year, fell in love with Minneapolis, and they came back to visit a couple times on my own. My partner at the time and I decided to move, and I just really loved the Twin Cities. It was a place that was a lot more affordable than Southern California, for one. So a young college student looking for a place to live and kind of find their path, it was a good place to explore and do that. But I loved the seasons. I loved the community out here. And I didn't realize what a hub the Twin Cities was for cycling and the arts and biking. I think the Midwest gets like a bad rap from coastal cities, right? We don't realize what a buried treasure we have in the Midwest sometimes. So moving out here, the longer I stayed out here, the more I just fell in love with everything about the Twin Cities, and then found my own path, like figured out what I wanted to do and what my path was and what my life was about. Really enjoyed the seasons. And I really, everybody warned me, the winters. So I pictured like abominable snowmen walking around in these like horrible, horrible winters. And the winters are intense, but they're not like, they're becoming, as I live here longer, they're becoming my favorite season because it's so nice to cozy up by a fire and write or paint. But the summers, nobody told me anything about the summers. They're buggy and there's all these mosquitoes and ticks and stuff. And I do love being by the lake in the summer and being outdoors, but nobody warned me about that like they warned me about the winters. And that was the rudest awakening coming to the Twin Cities.
Yes, it is quite a variety in the seasons. Thank you. I just want to remind everyone else, if you have questions or comments during the presentation, you can type those into the chat, or the Q&A section, and we'll let Jamie keep telling us more about herself and her projects.
Thanks. So for me, some of my core values, I really value creativity and how we learn and how we work and just like creative exploration. I really value inclusion and then access. So access to art and culture. And I really try to bring these values into the work that I do. I think one of the purposes that I feel that I have is I want every community to be able to have access to art and culture. I was really lucky living in Northeast Minneapolis for a while. It's really thick with art and culture, thick with lots of studios and galleries, and it just added so much, not a financial sense of wealth, but a community sense of wealth to everything we did. And I want every person to be able to have an access point to art and culture and a place for them that they feel that they can find belonging. And I think that creativity is something that we can explore, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation, but there's so much that we can benefit, even if you don't consider yourself an artist and you just enjoy art. There's a lot of benefits, like mental and physical, that can be had from art. And if it's a component of communities, I think it's a way that we can build whole and healthy communities. So here's an example of some projects that we did. This is work that I did when I was with the West Bank Business Association. So the West Bank Business Association, it really is it's a business focused nonprofit, but we were in Cedar Riverside, which is one of the most dense areas of the Midwest. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my video so I could turn it back on. There we go. So we did this boxes project, utility boxes. I'm sure you've seen these wraps before in other places. It's not the super newest thing, but we had a lot of these utility boxes up and down Cedar Avenue, lots of tagging, lots of stuff happening on those. We worked with the Cedar Riverside Community School to create some really awesome utility box wraps. And the Cedar Riverside Community School, it's a Title I school, charter school in Riverside Plaza. It's a lot of immigrant families, a lot of Somali and Ormo kids. So what we did, we worked with their art teacher, Brianna Jolie, kids brought different textiles that they liked, some of their traditional family fabrics, and she taught them how to do block printing and how to do you create the block with the rubber and then do the printing in the different colors. And so what we did was the kids looked at their fabrics, made patterns that they liked, and then created their own really beautiful block prints. Then we took all those, scanned them in, and then we wrapped the boxes up and down Cedar Avenue. So what was really rad about this is not only was it something that we did that helped with, turning some of the graffiti in the neighborhood, the kids could then go up and down the street with their elders, with their parents, and they could point to this thing like, hey, I helped do that. That's my art on that box. It's also, applied geometry. Kids are learning how the things are going to look when they're wrapped, and we're making little boxes that we have to fold over. So it was a really good practical thing to do with the kids in the neighborhood. We have a lot. So if you've been to the West Bank and you've been to the Twin Cities and this part of the cities, we have, there's a lot of bars in this district. There's a lot of residents and everybody's kind of right up on each other. There is an empty lot across the street from some of our venues, and this empty lot used to have Daniel Hall, which was a community space. It was a really beautiful, big old building. And the Daniel Hall burned down a couple decades ago. The lot still stands vacant. It's got a lot of emotional significance for the neighborhood, but it can be an area where there's a lot of trash, graffiti. We'll try to clean it up as best we could, but something we started doing as we were able to is hosting night markets and events to activate this space. And it connected with the bar traffic. People would be getting out of a show or getting ready to go into a show, and they would stop by the night market. There's a similar one that we learned a lot from the Frenchman Street Artist Market in New Orleans. And just having these night markets that activate these spaces that are otherwise, kind of just dark and lonely was something that was fun to do with the community in mind. So as Summer mentioned, we met through Altered Aesthetics, which is a nonprofit art gallery. We really tried to do as much as we could to be a community space. So for example, we had people coming into the gallery and say, I've never been to an art gallery before, but I really like bikes, and it's so cool to find art that resonates with me and the things that I like. We used to host an annual children's art show, so it was really great for kids to get to go and see their work up on a professional gallery space wall. And it was very encouraging for them, and then we'd have fun activities as well. So in the neighborhoods where I've worked, Twin Cities has a big bike culture, which is really great. There's an annual art event called Art World, and it's usually pre-COVID times have 20 to 30,000 people come to the Northeast Arts District and just be going from studio to studio, place to place. But you can imagine when that many people come into a little neighborhood, lots of car traffic. So we did what we could to encourage people to, bike around during Art World. We'd create these little bike pocket maps, encourage galleries to have bike racks and water for cyclists, and really just kind of have a more fun bike experience during Art World. In Cedar Riverside and in Northeast, we did events to try to encourage people to get familiar and comfortable biking around neighborhoods. So we started an annual Northeast ride. You can see that map on the top right. And on the West Bank, we started the West Bank ride. We realized we have a lot of kids in the neighborhood that have never ridden a bike before. A lot of kids whose parents, they're from a refugee population. They're not as comfortable on bikes, and they certainly don't feel comfortable biking around a pretty busy city area. So we hosted a little bike rodeo. Kids all got free helmets. After this, we would do years where we'd have bike giveaways for the kids. And it was just a great way to encourage cycling in the West Bank. The Northeast calendar. So this is something that we did. There's 13 great neighborhoods in Northeast. We started putting together an annual Northeast calendar and highlighting some of the arts throughout the district. So that way it was a way to celebrate the neighborhood with each month of the year, learn about a new artist, and it also ended up being like a great fundraising tool for the organization as well. On the West Bank, what's really pretty cool about the West Bank is we got 2 light rail stations. So there's the green line that goes to St. Paul. There's a blue line that goes to Bloomington. But between those 2 light rail stations along Cedar Avenue, there wasn't a lot of wayfinding and signage. So that's like how to get from point A to point B. So what we tried to do down that commercial corridor is we tried to do things just to activate the space. What you see here on the left is there's this little grassy area between one side of the shops and the other side of the shops that would just kind of get overrun, a little neglected. People would pass through it, but it wasn't well taken care of. So we do what we could to try to clean the space. We worked with an artist, a local artist, to create some benches for the area. And it was just things to help brighten and open the space and make it more usable for pedestrians and the people that live and work in the neighborhood. And nobody would have anticipated 2020. But with COVID, if you see where there's that food at the side of the building, they actually opened up the window at the wienery and put it in a little to-go window there, so people could go during COVID, get a hot dog or hamburger and sit outside on the benches and eat. So with the job I'm in now, as I mentioned, there's 24 different cultural districts in the Twin Cities, emerging, established. And cultural districts are often these concentrations of small businesses, communities, families, and we're not creating anything new with the work that we're doing. What we're really trying to do is bolster and support the communities that are already there. So how do we help them purchase their building so they're not displaced out of their space if the rents increase? How do we, with COVID, it was a lot of small business support. How do we support all these local businesses in these cultural districts? Over 90 to 95% of these businesses are locally owned and operated. There's not a lot of chains. So a lot of the work in our cultural districts is how do we support those businesses and those places that really make these districts unique. I'm going to pause for just a second. Any questions?
Jamie, we do have a question. Michael
Yes.
would like to hear more about the commission in Bloomington and what kinds of projects or initiative does that group do?
Thanks. And for those that just joined, I have a little bit of allergies, so I'm going to be ducking off periodically too with a Kleenex. It helps keep my allergies at bay. So with the Bloomington Commission, and I should note also, I've lived here for a couple of years. I just joined the commission. I need to go back. There we go. But I've been participating on some panels as well. What the commission does, the best way I could describe it is it's very similar to a nonprofit board where the commission approves a work plan for the creative placemaking department in the city of Bloomington. We help with vision setting, and we do this alongside staff. There's 9 seats on the commission, and then the commission also helps with projects like project-based work. For example, we just approved a series of sculptures that's going to happen in the South Loop of Bloomington. So different public art pieces. And then there's some relational work as well. City of Bloomington has a lot of really great roles around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're starting to build some new relationships with other community partners that weren't there before. So that way, as we're doing art, it's not just, plopping in this piece of art that doesn't really connect to the community, but it's, either an artist from the community or it's art that resonates with the community. And that's something that, guests will come through, they'll go to the Mall of America and they'll see like, oh, wow, there's this great art. But also if you live here, if you live in South Loop, you'll see this and you'll see, oh, that reminds me of the Nature Center. Oh, that reminds me of, the Southeast Asian restaurants we have in Bloomington. So there's that connectivity piece as well.
Okay, thank you. If there's any other questions, continue to put those in the chat and the Q&A. Otherwise, we'll let Jamie continue.
So something that we do regularly, and we try to find creative spins on this, is we do a lot of regular cleanups. We did these a lot on the West Bank, we did these in Northeast, we do these in Bloomington, and just reaffirming that, the neighborhood is ours, it's our responsibility to help clean up. With the West Bank specifically, we did an artist-led project where we created these really adorable signs that we then translated into all the neighborhood languages, or most of the neighborhood languages. And it was just, we live here, we work here, we learn here, please help keep our neighborhood clean. We would work closely with the mosques, and we timed some cleanups after Friday prayers so people could go to Friday prayers at the mosque. And a couple times we even had the imam join us in doing our cleanups. And just folks would come and they'd be helping clean up. And what better way after your prayer and your service to go help your community in this way too. But these were always really fun because it was a really tangible way to feel like we're helping out. We also encourage bars and restaurants. They adopted trash cans. We have these things, ash receptacles that like for people that are throwing out their cigarette butts. It was a bar district, so we'd get a lot of cigarette butts, and just encouraging businesses to help participate in that and help care for the neighborhood. We did a lot of murals on the West Bank and tried to do more. Through the city of Minneapolis, they had a facade grant matching program. So what that would do is like if you're going to get your door fixed or if you've got a broken window or you need to get your business re-sided, the city of Minneapolis will help pay for half of a portion of that. And you could use that for murals too. So what you see on I think it appears on the right for you too, but the Freewheel Bikes did this really cool bike mural all along the side of their shop. And then the bottom one, and these are things that the community wanted. The community, we do community engagement events, and they said murals, murals, murals. They say all over. That's what they wanted to see. The bottom is Theater in the Round, and they have this really cool. If you've ever been to theater, like the round is where you can sit at all sides, and you see theater all the way around. But they did this really cool, like symbolic mural on the side of their really giant building where it looks like the theater is just like exploding out of the building. And if you're coming up Cedar Avenue, it's a pretty tall, prominent building. It just looks like there's this ball getting ready to roll down the hill. So this is a mural that I did for Kiefer Court, which is also in the West Bank. It's right on the corner of Cedar and Riverside. And what we had here was we had a small business. It was a family-owned business. Kiefer Court is a Chinese-owned bakery and cafe. And the Kwan family, they were getting ready to transition the business to their daughter, Michelle. And so their wall had a lot of graffiti. It would get tagged often. And they started doing murals to help with mitigating the graffiti and also just create, this is a very prominent building in the neighborhood. So we worked together to do this mural, and it just represents the transition and change. in the shifting business ownership in the family. All the birds represent people in their family, and each bird represents one of their children and is a native bird to the area which that child was born. So I'm really fortunate that I get to do a lot of this creative placemaking through my work. I've looked for jobs that have allowed me to apply this passion to that work, but I also try to bring this home to my community as well. So, example, this Saturday we're hosting a workshop. I paint in kind of a batik style, but what batik really is it's what it's most known for is it's like a wax and dyeing technique. And I'm sure you've seen this before, but wax Indonesian textiles and other places in Asia and Southeast Asia, they'll use a wax to coat the fabric, and then they'll dye the fabric. And then once the dye sets, they'll wash out the wax, and it'll leave these beautiful patterns, and you can do layers and colors. But we're hosting a batik workshop in Bloomington for other folks in the API community to connect with one another, create some batiks, and then our hope is that when we take these, we'll be able to do similar things to the utility boxes in Cedar Avenue and wrap some of the Bloomington utility boxes. This is my house, and this is our little seed library. So I love the little free library project, but our block already has one. It's awesome. My neighbor curates that. I'm like, what can I do that's like also cool and adds a little something? So we thought, oh, a little seed library. So we share seeds with our neighbors, and then I plant things, and I share plantings and seedlings. We did a lot of peppers last year and even brought some little pumpkins, and just little fun things to try to bring some art and plant seeds of creativity in the neighborhood. Last year, we all trapped at home with COVID, and the school district shut down again. So when we all had cabin fever in the winter, we decided to do a neighborhood mailbox contest. So I think there's ways to bring creativity into your community, and it does not have to be fancy. It could just be seasonal and fun. And I think my kind of thought on this is, if you sow seeds of discord, that's what's going to come up. But if you really try to plant seeds of creativity and loving kindness, you'll not be sad about what grows. Any questions that I have missed while I've been chatting?
Thank you, Jamie. I was just thinking while you were talking about all these projects and how, your whole mission with all of this is to help people feel welcomed and to feel part of a community and to kind of create that community through the arts. And it made me think back to altered aesthetics and, how that is really what I found there. And I know a lot of other people found there too. And that's a big theme in your first book, but I just wanted to kind of share that from my experience, it's very true. I met a lot of people at Altered Aesthetics that became like my people. And before that, didn't really feel connected to any art community. After graduating from college, you have that built-in community and you kind of lose that. And so I was looking for that for a long time. And I just think that that organization and a lot of your other projects really have provided that for a lot of people. So it's just a testament to, the power that the arts have and how it can bring people together. We do also have a question about your engagement strategies. And when you're working with all of these different communities, how long does it take to build up these relationships, and what role do those communities play in deciding what the trajectory is for those projects?
I think I would say every which way, and for how communities decide, also every which way. I think for me, I think a way to sum it up is just meeting people where they're at. I think so the business association, for example, we have our electronic newsletter, and we have our little digital mailing list, and we have our spreadsheet with the addresses of businesses. But we knew we're working in a community with tons of small businesses. Most of them have only one staff member or one part-time person. and there's a lot of language barriers. We knew that our best way to get messages out, like if we had facade grants or if we had an opportunity or the city was bringing some policy down that businesses really needed to know about, like when we were doing the livable wage increases in Minneapolis, it was really important to meet people in person. So our strategy at the association was every business every quarter, and we booked out time as staff, and we would just spend, the 40 hours or plus over the course of the month to really get out to businesses. And then it's super fun too. You get to see people. My daughters came with me to work for the first years of their lives. I had a crib in my office. So I'd strap on my baby carrier and I would head out and just meet with businesses one-on-one. So I think that in-person strategy, which I know sounds really weird now to like just be out and about. I know we've got these COVID restrictions still. But it was just like a lot of in-person activity. And I think there was times like when, I want to break from social media, but there was like one or two businesses that the only way I could get a hold of them was by Facebook Messenger. So I'd keep Messenger so that I could get in touch with businesses that way. Some businesses, some people are really easy. They're just like super excited to have somebody in a role that's an advocate for them. Other businesses have just like, we worked with a lot of libertarian businesses that just had this intense distrust of government, and a business association that got its funding from the city was like of the devil. So they just really were apprehensive about any of our programs and just didn't, and it's a lot of, sometimes that trust takes a while to build. So, some relationships, so finally people were coming around after I was, working in the neighborhood for 5 years. Some people were on my team right away. Other people kind of never came around because they preferred to really work in their own little, they wanted to stay very independent and they didn't want to accept assistance, even if it's like free technical assistance or anything like that. So I think it's all those different ways. For the art strategies, again, different, because if it was a public art piece that we're doing on a public parcel, there would be a community engagement strategy that we'd have. And we try to always do more, like the city would have specific guidelines and parameters, but they were pretty quick. We would try to do a lot more with translation, and I think the city has come a long way, and they do more of this now. But there were times when we would start that process long before the city process started, so that we were sure we had translation. We'd have meetings in the weekday morning, weekday evening, and on the weekend. So we're hitting at all those different times when people were possibly not working. But if it was like a private property, like the Kiefer Court mural, we did some connection with the community, but that was a mural that it's public facing, but it's private property. So in addition to the community outreach, it was really working with the Kwan family and figuring out what they wanted to see and something that was important for their family, and sort of more like a focused type of placemaking with them.
Well, speaking of your artwork and that mural, we have another question. Someone was curious about the artwork that was on that intro screen, the self-portrait.
Oh,
And wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And they were wondering if that's part of your practice. You mentioned the batik style, so.
yeah, so the batik gets like the scallops and the patterns there. That piece was a self-portrait that I did. I went through, was it 2018 or 2019, where I'm like, I come from a family where, it's not good for women to be angry or show those emotions. But I felt like, I get frustrated with my kids sometimes, like when they're battling bedtime or when they're like throwing spoons. Like I felt like rage is something that I had stifled for so long. So I'm like, I want to learn more about like the full spectrum of my emotions. And I don't like when I get angry or lose my temper. So like, what is it? I want to know more about that, so that way I can like I feel like when I understand things better, it helps me with managing them. So I went through this process where I went through a series of books, and I'll do audiobooks while I paint, or I'll do podcasts. And I read a series of books. I read Rage Becomes Her, Good and Mad, and then what was the last one? Eloquent Rage by Professor Crunk, Brittany Cooper, I think. And I read through those 3 books. They're excellent, excellent books. They talk a lot about the suffragist movement and the feminist movements, and the role society has kind of allowed women's anger to play and not play, and how we kind of regulate women's emotions. So I did this portrait of like kind of my 2 states of mind. Like, one is this like peaceful bliss where like I look pretty and I'm blowing dandelions. The other one was like I'm really angry and I'm like shouting. And I had to like put on my angry face and trace it and like figure out like, how do I look when I'm angry? And I'm like, oh, that does not look good. But yeah, that's a portrait, and the title of it is Rage Becomes Her and Wishing for Wishes. I wrote a piece, I can drop it in the chat in a bit, but I wrote a piece about that process and that rage in general for Pollen Midwest, which is a local nonprofit. But I can drop that in the chat. I'm gonna keep rolling forward and get through these. I don't want to run us out of time. Thanks again for all being here. I think we've all kind of like, if you're here, you probably already appreciate the value of arts. But a couple of things that I wanted to highlight as well, and I'll try to get through these quickly. Additional benefits. Art boosts. So when kids have art in schools, in addition to math, reading, and science, I think it's a core component of education. But as we see the data roll out for things like this, we see that kids that have access to art, music, and they've got that in the mix, they're doing better in math, they're doing better in their reading, and it's part of their whole comprehensive education. The art, and I think this gets underplayed a lot, I don't think a lot of people realize what a big part of the US economy, our arts economy is. It is now outpacing agriculture as a big part of our economy, the creative sector. So that's things like music, dance, art, graphic design. These are the movie industry, film, Netflix, everything like that. It is a huge part of our local economy, and especially as we move towards jobs like these, it's going to continue to grow as a part of our economy. So we know that art helps with depression and anxiety. Creating art helps with one's sense of self-being. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but in a lot of community vitality indexes, culture really is a form of wealth. We talk about people having social capital and their ability to network. We talk about intellectual capital and building that up in our communities for our children and sending them to school. But most bars, when people think of wealth, most of the bars thinking about financial wealth, right? Like what's your household income? What's your revenue? But there's so many other forms of wealth to think about. So when we talk about building whole and healthy communities, we're talking about wealth more than just the money you're making at your job, but it's, do you have access to green space? Do you have clean air and clean water? Do you have access to art and culture? And having those things within your community is another form of wealth. And I do think art has a beauty in and of itself also, so there's just the pure aesthetic value. Public art, murals like the ones I showed you, we can see this data everywhere across the states. It is a proven graffiti deterrent and visual booster. And then I think public art that does its job well is art that instills a sense of place and belonging. Like those utility boxes in Cedar Avenue, super simple thing, right? It's just wrapping up boxes, but doing it with the kids, having them help create it and learn something and feel proud of, that's something that helps them feel like that's theirs. I think cultural and creative practice is a way to instill kindness and respect for our elders. A lot of narrative storytelling in cultural communities, this is a way to share stories, share family histories, and I think that this practice done well is a way that we can continue to show elder respect and care for our ancestors. It is a happiness booster, and we all need that, especially after a really rough year of COVID. It boosts endorphins that trigger happiness, and it is demonstrated happiness booster. This one I really love. This is art as a demonstrated stress reliever also. What I love about this one is the studies show that it doesn't matter what level you're creating. You could be painting like a paint by numbers. You could be doing something like super basic. You could be doing watercolor with your kids, which I do often. At any level, it reduces stress hormones. So you don't have to be good. You don't have to be creating this Mona Lisa. You could just be doing watercolors with your kids, and it reduces those stress hormones that are in your body. It's a self-esteem booster. So if you've got a kid that's struggling with insecurity or at school, the arts really matters because it gives them a way to feel good about themselves and something that they've done. And it's a demonstrated self-esteem booster for kids, especially in education. Helps with healing from trauma. So we're seeing more and more, and we're doing some long-term studies with vets and with kids that have early childhood trauma, art helps with healing. And that's really critical because there's not a lot of things. There's these, and I can have Summer share the link too with part of this presentation. But I think that one of the things that's really, really valuable about art is how it's helping veterans that are coming back from war-torn countries, kids that are dealing with early childhood trauma. It gives them a way to heal, to deal with the trauma, and to express the trauma in a way that's not going to be re-triggering that trauma for them, or it's a way for them to process that in a healthy way, in a gentle way. It literally opens pathways in the brain. So I think this really goes back to what we're learning about education. You know, when kids are coloring, they're doodling and drawing, and when adults are doing this as well, what the studies are showing, what the science shows, like it's activating different spots in your brain. It's creating open pathways, and it's helping open up your brain and exercise your brain. I think creating access to art and culture is going to be one of the big tools that we have in our fight against white supremacy. We can create good policies, we can create, try to create good communities, but having this access point to art and culture, it's going to be really beneficial in that. As you hear from, there's groups like Life After Hate, I think is the name of it, and as they talk to kids that are recruited for these like extremist groups, it doesn't start off with that radical ideology, right? It starts out with kids that are looking for a sense of belonging. They don't fit in, they feel isolated, and they find a group that helps them connect. So I think if we have other options for them that are better, more creative, communities have, art walls that they could do on. And if we have other better options for those kids that are feeling isolated, it's going to be helpful in that fight. I'm going to try to scoot through this last part really quickly because I know we're running low on time. So one thing I wanted to leave you with are what are some ways that you can connect with your community and kind of create these opportunities within your community. So we've learned a lot about the benefits. Now what do we do? Here are some ideas for ways you can get creative. Connect to your culture, get reacquainted with your roots, and start with ancestry.com. You can start with stuff like that, but just like dig in a little bit if you haven't done this already. Find those familial connection points and connect to your culture. I think one way to do that is learning an ancestral language, learning one of your family language. This like art opens pathways in your brain. There are different ways to express things in your native tongue and language that you might not have in the English language. I think this is something really exciting for folks to do. Examine the culinary aspects of your roots. Eat at cultural food spots, but especially yours. Find those things that are part of your family history. No lutefisk, that's my only rule when it comes to this. I don't recommend lutefisk. I had to try it. I was forced to try it in the Midwest and not my favorite, I'll be honest. Connect family interviews and story preservation. I think this is a part of that elder respect, passing down those family histories from generation to generation. I think it's so valuable. Something that I've been starting to do with my family, and because we've got fragmented families due to the immigration, it's hard to gather all of that. But if we do that and pass it on from generation to generation, we're not going to lose as much. Nurture neighborhood creativity, encourage this, if you want to do a mailbox decorating contest in your neighborhood too, but just being supportive of those creative ideas when they come about. And then supporting creative activities and events in your neighborhood, finding the PTAs and the ways you can volunteer. And then nurturing the creativity of the young people in your life, and my nieces are all older than my kids. My sister and I are pretty far apart. But something I did as a 20-something feminist is like, I knew my nieces were going to get dolls. They were going to have this and that from other people. So I really wanted to be the aunt that, like, I got them all the art supplies. So whenever they'd get their presents from me, it would all be paints and journals and sketchbooks and stuff like that. And that was the way I wanted to, and they loved it, and they loved it. It was all fun to do together. And then make time to be creative yourself. And it can come in any different ways: sketch, doodle, paint, draw, knit. Go volunteer with creative organizations and cultural organizations. As things open back up, theaters always need ushers. You can get free tickets. You can help out in those ways. And I think connecting creativity or faith is really important too. One of my favorite things a mentor once told me is that if we are anything like God, it's in that we are creative beings. Excuse me. Those allergies are kicking in as I try to go through this quickly. I'm going to pause for any questions for a moment.
Jamie, I was wondering, in your section here, you're talking a lot about connecting to your culture, to your family roots, learning languages, and just being creative. And I know that you somewhat recently took a trip back to Sri Lanka. You get to meet a lot of family that you hadn't met before, and then your artistic practice since that has really been impacted. Would you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, for me, I feel like connecting with my culture has been a part of becoming whole. I think going and doing that trip with my dad, he had not been back since he left the country when he immigrated to the States. So going there with him was really important. Learning more, like I had done masks. I mentioned that I did masks with that Halloween haunt and I made monsters. I just felt really drawn to it. I loved sculpting. I loved making masks. I loved making these like wild, imaginative things. And I had no idea that mask making is a part of Sri Lankan culture, traditional practice. That was part of their medicinary, where they'd have somebody, they come, they would put on masks, they would do cultural dance, and it would be a part of their healing practice as well. So that trip was really impactful and just connecting with my roots in the art that I discovered and learned about while I was there, but also just me becoming more confident and self-aware and feeling like I knew who I was and learning who I am as I get older. And I think this is a lifelong journey. I imagine my art will continue to evolve. But yeah, that trip was very, very impactful. I've told my mom has not been back to Poland since she left the country when she was a teenager. And I told her that I have to go with her. Like, it's very important. So we've been planning this trip. We had it almost dialed in, and then COVID shutdown happened again. So our hope is 2022. We're hoping to go. So I'm going to scoot through this. Cooking your way to reconnecting with your cultural connection. I think, so I cook a lot with my mom. I've cooked a lot with my aunties. I think that this is one way to really like get connected with those things, that the foods that are important with your culture. I think seeking out and supporting emerging creative projects. So there's things like Kiva, Kickstarter, and GoFundMe, not just in your neighborhood, but elsewhere, like really helping boost those projects that are in need of support. And then this is something that I do that I think everybody should explore. Write your story. I think capturing our personal narratives is really important, and only you can tell your story in the way that you're going to tell it. So I encourage folks to explore that. Super quick, I'm just going to go through some radical creativity. There's just 4 of these. There's not 13 of these, but some things that are happening in the Twin Cities and elsewhere that I think are really, really great, and I want to highlight. Ideas like universal basic income for artists, or universal basic income in general is great, but things like Springboard for the Arts has a pilot project they're doing right now where a group of artists are going to be getting a stipend every month for 18 months. And the thought is, artists are giving back to their community. Artists were, after we had the uprisings in the Twin Cities, artists were painting murals on boards and doing community healing practices. And this is their way of like supporting that kind of cultural connectivity work that's happening already in communities. I mentioned this before. I really think art is education. I think it should be up there with math. I mean, I can't think of the last time I did algebra. Well, actually, I did algebra with my daughter. But in general day-to-day life, I don't do a lot of algebra, but I'm matching colors. I'm designing rooms. We're using all these practical sides of art. And I think it should be a part of a core component of our education. Decolonization of museums. I can drop another link in the chat. A lot of museums and collections still have a lot of items that were procured as part of colonization, and we're starting to see the decolonization process happen. I don't think we would have been having this conversation 5-10 years ago. We've come pretty far, but we're seeing that these artifacts that were collected as countries were colonized are starting to be returned gradually to the countries from which they came. I learned a lot about my history from British historians because Sri Lanka was a British colony. And I think that the more we can return some of these artifacts and have the narrative be in the hands of the people from a place and not just those who colonized it or those who took over that country, we're going to see more of that in years to come. In every community with access to art and culture. Here's some ways to connect. I went right up to that. Thank you for being patient with my sniffling and me stepping out as I needed to. Is there any questions? Well, we've got a minute or two left.
There are no more questions in the chat, but if anyone has them, this is your last chance to add them. We've got about a minute left with Jamie here. So while we're waiting to see if anyone has any final questions, I'll just say thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us. I know that this takes a lot of time to put something like this together, and I know that you have family obligations that are happening in the background without you right now. So
could you hear Z? She's shouting now.
No, I can't even hear. My kids are making a lot of noise upstairs as well, but I don't think anyone can hear them. So thank you so much.
I see.
What's that?
Okay. I was gonna say, I see a question for Mike. The cartoon drawings at the beginning of the presentation were from my first book. They're an artist, Athena Courier, did illustrations for my first book, and those are from that book.
Oh yes, thank you. I missed that one. Yeah, any other questions before we go? Thank you all who were able to join us tonight. This will be posted on our website and it will be on our YouTube channel, so you can share it with others if you enjoyed and want them to be able to see it as well. And just one last time, Jamie Schumacher, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I hope that folks connect. I'd love to hear more from who is here.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Night, everybody.